The air was calm that morning, the kind of glassy stillness that only a lake in early autumn could hold. A thin fog hovered over the water, curling and dissipating with the warmth of the rising sun. I had been sitting on the edge of my dock, sipping coffee from my old enamel mug, watching a heron stalk fish in the shallows. The dock was my sanctuary, weathered planks nailed down by my own hands years ago, jutting proudly into the water, the place I could breathe freely after long days at work. That's when I heard the sharp clap of expensive sandals against wood. I didn't even need to turn my head to know who it was. Karen. The HOA's self-appointed queen, visor perched like a crown, oversized sunglasses hiding eyes that never blinked, a pastel sweater tied in a knot over her shoulders like some badge of honor. She carried her eternal weapon, a clipboard crammed with papers, highlighted and tabbed as if she were preparing for war. "Good morning, neighbor," she called out, her voice dripping with false politeness. She dragged out the word neighbor like it was a bitter taste in her mouth. I turned slowly, mug in hand, and gave her a small nod. "Morning, Karen. What brings you to my dock?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Whenever she showed up with that clipboard, trouble followed. She strutted onto the dock without invitation, her perfume invading the crisp air, her heels clicking on the boards I had sanded myself. She planted herself firmly at the midpoint, blocking the view of the lake like she owned the horizon. "Actually," she said, pushing her sunglasses down to peer at me, "this isn't your dock. According to the HOA guidelines, Section 14, Paragraph B, no private structures are permitted on community shoreline property. Therefore, you're in violation. Effective immediately, you're to dismantle this dock or face penalties." Her tone was cold, absolute. She believed her clipboard carried the weight of law. I couldn't help but laugh. The sound startled a duck from the reeds. "Karen," I said slowly, "this dock has been here long before you even moved into this neighborhood. It's mine. I built it. And for your information, the shoreline here is part of my deeded property. Check the county records if you doubt it." Her jaw tightened, but she shook her head in mock sympathy, as if she were dealing with a lost child. "No, no, no. You don't understand how this works. The HOA supersedes outdated land surveys. We've modernized the rules to ensure harmony and aesthetics. Your dock is an eyesore, and several board members have already complained. I'm here to inform you, take it down today, or we'll take legal action. Consider this your final warning." She shoved a folded paper into my chest, the so-called notice of violation, and stood with her arms crossed like she'd just toppled a dictator. For a long moment, I stared at her, the paper crumpling in my hand. I felt the familiar rush of irritation rise in my chest, the same feeling I'd had every time Karen tried to enforce her petty dominion over me or any other neighbor. But this time, something inside me hardened. My dock wasn't just a pile of boards, it was freedom, peace, the soul of my property. And no HOA bylaw written in pastel ink could take that away. I stood, towering over her, my boots firm on the wood. "You've made a mistake coming here with that attitude," I said evenly, my voice steady but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. She blinked, but held her ground, her lips pursed like a tightened knot. "This dock isn't going anywhere. In fact," I added, stepping closer, lowering my tone so only she could hear, "the only thing that's going somewhere today is your boat." Her sunglasses slid an inch down her nose as her mouth parted in shock. She scoffed, shaking her head like I'd spoken nonsense. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. But even as she said it, her confidence wavered. Because she knew me well enough to understand, I never made empty threats. My eyes drifted over her shoulder to where her shiny white pontoon was tied to the community slip, its chrome railings glinting in the sun. A mischievous smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. The hour had come, and this time, I wasn't the one who'd be evicted. The moment Karen stormed off my dock, clutching her clipboard like a scepter stripped of its power, I knew this was no ordinary standoff. She thought she had delivered the final word, but her arrogance had given me exactly the ammunition I needed. The HOA's notice sat crumpled in my fist, an insult that practically dared me to strike back. And what better target than the gleaming pontoon boat she left bobbing smugly at the community slip? It was practically winking at me in the morning sun, polished rails flashing like it was laughing at my situation. That boat wasn't just her pride and joy, it was her throne. Karen spent her weekends there hosting cocktail parties, blaring yacht rock from her overpriced Bluetooth speakers, parading her so-called exclusive lifestyle for everyone within earshot. To strip her of that symbol would hit deeper than any legal response ever could. I walked back to my cabin and set the crumpled notice on the kitchen counter. My dog, Scout, wagged his tail and tilted his head, sensing the storm brewing inside me. "She wants to play games, huh?" I muttered, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. "Fine. We'll play." As I stared out the window at her pontoon rocking gently on the slip, my mind sharpened into focus. This wasn't going to be some reckless act of vandalism. No, this was strategy. Karen operated on fear and control, and the best way to dismantle her power was to show her she had none over me. I needed a plan, something bold but precise, something that would leave her speechless and scrambling. The idea began to take shape like a storm cloud gathering over still waters. I was going to seize that boat, not as theft, but as leverage. A statement she couldn't ignore. Preparation came naturally to me. I had spent my life working with my hands, repairing engines, restoring cabins, and dealing with people who thought they could muscle me into submission. Karen was just another flavor of that breed. I went to my shed and unlocked the old steel chest that held everything from extra rope to boat tools. Inside lay the coil of heavy-duty nylon I used for securing logs during spring floods. Strong, weathered, unbreakable. I slung it over my shoulder and grabbed the boat hook, the kind of simple tool that could double as both anchor and pry bar. As I walked back toward the dock, my boots crunching on the gravel path, my pulse quickened, not from nerves but anticipation. This wasn't about rebellion for the sake of it. This was about defending what was mine and proving that Karen's clipboard kingdom had limits. By the time I reached the shoreline, the lake had fully awakened. Sunlight shimmered on the ripples, fishermen cast their lines in the distance, and a breeze teased the tops of the pines. Karen's boat rocked lazily, tied up with decorative white rope that screamed more fashion than function. I crouched at the edge of my dock and studied the situation like a general surveying a battlefield. The slip was technically community property, sure, but I knew every board and piling there from years of upkeep that the HOA never bothered to do. That boat was sitting in my domain, whether Karen realized it or not. I traced the plan in my head step by step, untie the decorative ropes, secure my own lines, and tow her pontoon to my private dock. Simple, clean, and most importantly, public. Because nothing would rattle Karen more than everyone seeing her Queen's carriage, parked firmly in enemy territory. Still, a plan without timing is just wishful thinking. I had to strike in the right moment, and I already knew when. Karen loved her mid-morning routine, a trip to the coffee shop in town followed by a slow drive around the neighborhood to monitor things she thought were out of line. She'd be gone at least an hour, which was more than enough time for me to execute the operation. I leaned back, stretched my shoulders, and let the excitement simmer into calm resolve. Scout barked once, his ears pricked toward the dirt road that wound past the cabins. Sure enough, Karen's silver SUV came into view, gliding down the lane like a shark through shallow waters. She didn't even glance toward her boat. She was too busy flipping through that clipboard in her lap. Within minutes, she was gone, her dust trail dissolving behind the trees. The hour had come. I stood, slung the rope across my chest, and stepped onto the dock with the kind of determination a man gets when pushed one time too many. Each footfall felt heavier, deliberate, like I was stamping my claim into the boards themselves. The pontoon swayed, waiting for me, its spotless hull reflecting the water's glitter. I knelt at the slip and ran my hands over the factory-tight knots Karen's husband had probably tied, neat and shallow. Amateurs. With a quick twist of my wrist, the first line came free. Then another. And another. The boat drifted slightly, untethered, as though it too was tired of Karen's leash. I smiled, tying my own rope around the cleat with the kind of knot that wouldn't budge in a hurricane. This wasn't just possession, it was justice, measured one knot at a time. I had always liked the quiet precision of working with boats, the rhythm of lines, the click of cleats, the way the hull answers to a careful hand. There's something almost meditative about it, like tuning an instrument you plan to play loudly later. I eased the pontoon away from the slip with the practiced patience of someone who's learned to listen to the water. It slid with a soft sigh, a little reluctant at first, then obedient as I took up the strain on the rope. Scout sat on the dock with his tail tucked around his paws, watching me like a judge. He'd been with me through every dumb scheme and every sensible decision. Today, he watched because this felt different even to him. The morning light lay thick across the lake, turning the surface into a sheet of hammered metal. With one steady shove and a swing of the outboard that I coaxed into life, the pontoon answered and we began to move. Towing someone's boat is an awkward waltz. You don't want to lurch and yank. You want a steady pull that keeps the towed vessel from yawing and clattering into pilings. I set the throttle slow and straight, keeping watch on the boat's bow and the way the sun glazed across the vinyl seats. There were neighbors about, an old man in a straw hat on the far shore, a couple of teenagers on paddleboards, and I wanted this to remain as calm and dignified as possible. Pride, after all, doesn't have to shout. I steered us around the small buoy field and cut a path close to the reeds where the water ran deeper. The pontoon's motor chugged in an easy, contented rhythm, as if it were enjoying the ride. I felt a faint thrill, a craftsman's satisfaction the moment a difficult maneuver goes right. Kept to that feeling, let it cushion whatever ripples were coming. Halfway across the cove, my radio crackled to life with a click of a neighbor's channel, an elderly voice carrying the startled tone of someone who hadn't expected to hear this news. "Hey, is that Karen's boat?" I kept my face calm, pretending not to hear, though my stomach tightened. I could see the boat from two angles now, her pontoon, stolid and immaculately clean, rolling gently behind me, and the reflection of the neighborhood, where lawns sloped toward the water and flags fluttered idly. I kept my speed low and my eyes ahead, aware that sooner or later someone would recognize the boat and that the moment we'd all been waiting for, when private drama becomes public spectacle, was approaching. That was okay. I wanted everyone to see what Karen prized most, being taken out of her orbit and put somewhere she couldn't control. It felt like planting a small liberty flag. Pulling into my private dock felt almost ceremonial. My dock was narrower and older, with boards darkened by sun and salt, a place with dents and stories. As I eased the pontoon alongside, I could see the glint of chrome rails against the grain of my wood, and a ridiculous, sharp joy flared up in me. I tied off with the same knot I'd used to take it, clean, immovable, and double-checked the cleats as if securing a secret. Scout hopped down onto the jetty, tail high, and nosed the pontoon's side as if claiming a lost friend. I shut the motor off, and for a beat there was only the quiet, the water sighing against the hull, a distant lawnmower, a loon calling. It felt impossibly satisfying and horribly childish in equal measure. But the plan hadn't been romantic. It had been deliberate. I left a note folded under the boat's windshield wiper, polite, clinical, and impossible to ignore. "This boat is being held as leverage while HOA claims are resolved. Remove your violation notice and we talk." I didn't gloat. I was pragmatic. The note was a trap laid bare for anyone with a temper and a clipboard. No plan, no matter how well rehearsed, unfolds without a wrinkle. Just as I finished securing the pontoon and started walking back up the path, a truck pulled into my neighbor's drive and the HOA's attorney, of all people, climbed out, expensive shoes sinking into gravel. He looked around, took in the pontoon at my dock, and frowned. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind snapped into problem-solving mode. There was a camera mounted on the top of the community pavilion, one of Karen's little obsessions, and if that footage showed me taking her boat, it could be used against me in a court of angry memos and costly hearings. I needed witnesses, context, and a narrative. I walked back to the dock, pulled out my phone, and began recording. Not just one angle but two, three, the slipping off the old mooring, the calm approach, the clean tie-off. I spoke into the camera, steady and measured. This boat was left unattended in what I maintain is my shoreline. I secured it to prevent damage and to open a dialogue. HOA notice received at 9:10 a.m., boat secured at 9:45 a.m. I uploaded the clip to a private cloud I kept for such contingencies and texted a copy to my closest neighbor, who owed me for a dozen favors and now a story to tell. The next hour was a study in flaring tempers and careful diplomacy. Word spread quickly. A small crowd gathered along the shoreline like seagulls circling a fresh catch. Some called me brave, others called me reckless. Someone suggested calling the police. Someone else wanted a meeting. Karen's SUV came tearing back down the road before I'd had a chance to lock up my tools. She jumped out, her face white with fury, and barreled toward the dock with the precise indignation of someone whose world had been rearranged without her consent. She clutched the violation notice like talisman, and her voice rose to that particular timbre that had caused so many late-night debates at HOA meetings. "You cannot do this," she shrieked. "That boat belongs to me, and you have no right." I held up my hand to cut her off, already tired of shouting over her. "Karen," I left a note. "We can talk, or we can do this in front of everyone. Your choice." Her anger flickered into calculation for a second, the gears turning, trying to align strategy with emotion. The crowd watched, and I felt, in that instant, how a simple boat could turn into an argument about power, respect, and who gets to draw lines on a map. By the time the officer arrived, the lake had become a theater. Statements would be made, photos would be taken, and somewhere in that paperwork would be the kernel of the next scene. I stayed calm and factual, handing over my recordings and pointing to the note beneath the windshield. Karen told her version, of course she did, and the officer listened, rating the story for facts. He told us both to stay civil until the HOA could mediate, leaving the pontoon fastened at my dock for the time being. As the officer drove away, I felt the aftershocks settle into something like relief. The towing had been cleaner than I'd dared hope, the confrontation had been sharper. And in the space between the noise and the quiet, I realized we had shifted something. We had moved from private grievance to public negotiation, and there was no stepping back now. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds in silence. The moment the officer left, she spun on her heels and stormed back to her SUV, her visor nearly toppling off as she muttered into her phone. Even from across the water, I could hear the sharp staccato of her words. She wasn't calling a friend, she was summoning reinforcements. That was the way she operated, swarm tactics. Where reason failed, she relied on numbers, wearing down opposition with endless meetings, letters, and rules that seemed written for the sole purpose of asserting dominance. Within 30 minutes, cars began arriving in twos and threes. The HOA board, her loyal lieutenants, descended on the lakeshore like vultures circling fresh carrion. Clipboards clutched, khakis ironed, they whispered among themselves, casting glances at my dock where Karen's pristine pontoon now rested. The sight of her boat sitting proudly in my possession sent visible ripples through the group. This was no longer a dispute about wood and water, this was war on their queen's pride. Karen positioned herself at the center of the gathering, barking orders and waving her clipboard like a battle standard. "Document everything," she screeched. "Get photos, get witness statements, call the county if you have to. He's committed theft, grand theft." Her words hung over the crowd like thunder. Several of the board members dutifully snapped photos of the pontoon, angling their phones as though capturing evidence for a crime scene. Others scribbled furiously in notebooks, their brows furrowed in grim concentration. I stood at the edge of my dock, arms crossed, letting the performance wash over me. Scout sat beside me, ears flicking, picking up the tension that buzzed like static in the air. I wasn't intimidated. If anything, I was amused. Karen's fury was so blinding, so unrestrained, that she couldn't see how ridiculous she looked. A queen whose throne had been rolled out from under her, shrieking at the peasants to bring it back. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen had power, not because she was right, but because she was relentless. She thrived on wearing people down until they surrendered just to find peace. That was her weapon, attrition. If I let her spin this narrative unchecked, she could poison the neighborhood against me, turn allies into bystanders, and isolate me until the HOA crushed me under fines and hearings. So I did something she didn't expect. I addressed the crowd. Stepping forward, I raised my voice so it carried across the water. "Let me make this clear," I said, calm but firm. "Karen came to my dock this morning and handed me a notice saying my dock, my private dock, on my deeded land, was a violation. She tried to evict me from property that has been mine for years. You all know this dock. You fished from it, tied up your canoes, borrowed tools to fix your boats right here. And yet, according to Karen, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to her. Tell me, is that the HOA you want, one that steals from its members?" Murmurs rippled through the group. People shifted uneasily, some lowering their clipboards. Karen's face went crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. She hadn't expected me to seize the narrative. She thought I'd play defense, but instead, I'd thrown her first stone back at her with twice the force. Karen tried to recover, jabbing her finger at me like a spear. "Don't listen to him. He's twisting the facts. The HOA governs community property, and he's in violation. This theft is proof of his disregard for rules and decency." But her words were shrill now, desperate. I smiled slightly and held up my phone. "Everything I did is documented. The boat wasn't stolen, it was secured, to prevent damage and to ensure her baseless violation notice doesn't escalate unchecked. I left a note. I called for dialogue. What has she done? She's assembled a mob. You all came here to witness a crime, but what you're seeing is a defense of private property. Whose side are you really on?" The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the lapping of waves against the dock. Some of the board members avoided her gaze, their loyalty faltering. They weren't ready to openly defy her, but doubt had taken root. And doubt, I knew, was more dangerous to Karen than any rope tied to a cleat. Her fury boiled over. "Fine," she spat, her voice trembling. "If none of you have the backbone to enforce the rules, I'll do it myself. I'll call the sheriff, I'll call the county assessor, I'll take this all the way to court if I have to. And when I win, and I will win, that dock will be gone, and you," she pointed at me with a trembling hand, "you'll be paying fines so steep you'll wish you never laid a single board." She spun on her heel, muttering curses, storming back toward her SUV. The board hesitated, torn between following their leader and lingering to hear more. I let her go. Let her rage stew in silence. Because I had planted something far stronger than fear that morning. I had planted doubt in her followers, and once that seed grows, no clipboard in the world can cut it down. The following Thursday, the air in the community center was thick with tension. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the long folding tables creaked under stacks of bylaws and legal binders, and the faint smell of burnt coffee clung to the room like a stubborn stain. Every chair was filled. Neighbors who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in years showed up, curious to see the fallout of what they were calling, in whispers, the dock incident. Some leaned forward, eager for spectacle. Others sat stiff-backed, worried this conflict would bleed into property values. I sat near the back, arms crossed, letting Karen bask in her throne at the head table. She sat beneath the framed mission statement of the HOA like it was her personal crest, visor tucked neatly at her side, hair coiffed to perfection, and a folder so thick with papers it could stop a bullet. Her eyes locked on me the moment I entered, a cold gleam of triumph already dancing in them. She thought this was her turf, her battlefield, and that the home crowd would cheer her into victory. She called the meeting to order with the gavel, a real one she had insisted on buying, even though the HOA didn't need it. The sharp crack echoed through the room like a gunshot. "First on the agenda," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured authority, "is the violation at Dock 12, constructed without HOA authorization and currently under investigation." Murmurs rippled through the audience, eyes shifting toward me. I didn't flinch. She went on, flipping dramatically through papers. "This dock is in violation of Section 14, Paragraph B, and must be removed immediately. Furthermore, the unlawful seizure of a board member's personal property, my pontoon boat, constitutes theft and vandalism. I will now open the floor for discussion." She set the gavel down with a smirk, certain the crowd would leap to her defense. But something had shifted since that morning by the lake. The board members she had summoned like soldiers weren't so eager now. They shifted in their seats, clearing their throats, eyes avoiding hers. Finally, one of them, a quiet man named Harris, who usually stayed in Karen's shadow, spoke up. "Actually, Karen," he said slowly, "I looked into the property records myself. The dock is on his deeded land. County surveyor's map shows it plain as day." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Karen's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. "You're mistaken," she snapped. "The HOA supersedes outdated maps. Our authority," but Harris cut her off, emboldened by the gasps around them. "Authority doesn't mean ownership. You can't evict a man from his own land." His words hung heavy, and for the first time, I saw Karen's confidence crack. I rose to my feet. My voice carried steady, calm, but sharp as a blade. "You all came here tonight because you know what happened wasn't just about a dock or a boat. It was about power. Karen tried to take what wasn't hers. She tried to dictate where my land ends, even though the law says otherwise. When I refused to bow, she called me a thief. But you all saw what happened. I didn't hide the boat. I didn't damage it. I secured it at my dock and left a note. I documented everything. That wasn't theft, that was a line in the sand. And I'll tell you all this, if she can do it to me, she can do it to any one of you. I paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, seeing the flicker of recognition, the nods, the whispers. This isn't about harmony or aesthetics. It's about control. And if we let Karen write her own rules, none of us are safe. Karen slammed her gavel so hard the head cracked against the table. Enough, she shrieked, her composure crumbling. He's manipulating you. He's dangerous. He stole my property. Her voice rose higher, shriller, until it no longer sounded like authority but desperation. The crowd shifted again, this time away from her. A neighbor in the back stood up, clearing his throat. Karen, he said evenly, maybe it's time you step back. We've all been putting up with your overreach. The dock's his. That much is clear. And as for the boat, sounds to me like he proved his point without hurting anything. Maybe we should stop calling it theft and start calling it a wake-up call. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling into a current of defiance. Karen's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but the tide had shifted. The Queen's court was collapsing. Her face went pale, then flushed scarlet. She grabbed her stack of papers, scattering half of them onto the floor, and stormed out of the meeting hall, her heels clattering like retreating gunfire. The gavel lay abandoned on the table, cracked and useless. The room hummed with relief, laughter, and whispered conversations about what came next. The board, awkward without their leader, adjourned the meeting in record time. As the crowd dispersed, people clapped me on the back, whispered thanks, even offered beers for later. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, knowing that this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to surrender without plotting revenge. But that night, in the heart of her kingdom, she had been dethroned, and everyone had witnessed it. For a brief, dangerous moment, I thought Karen might be finished. After the disaster of the HOA meeting, after the applause that drowned out her shrieking, after she stormed off with papers fluttering in her wake, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally crawl back into the shadows. But I should have known better. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly, she was the type to reload. And by the following week, the evidence of her next strike was already slithering into my mailbox. Certified letters. 3 of them. Each stamped with the HOA's seal, each thicker than a small-town phone book. Inside, fines. Pages of them, stacked high, printed in cold bureaucratic language. Non-compliance. Community disruption. Unauthorized possession of personal property. Every one came with a dollar figure that climbed higher than the last, designed not to enforce rules but to bleed me dry. I laughed the first time, a bitter sound that startled Scout as he lay by the fire. But when the third letter arrived, threatening a lien on my home, the laughter soured into anger. Karen hadn't given up, she'd simply changed weapons. The escalation didn't stop at paper. Suddenly, I noticed my trash pickup mysteriously skipped. A letter from the county zoning office arrived, triggered by an anonymous complaint about my cabin's structural integrity. Code enforcement officers showed up one morning, measuring tape in hand, poking around my dock like vultures. My mailbox was dented one evening, my driveway mysteriously blocked the next by a strange SUV. It wasn't coincidence, it was Karen's playbook, bury the enemy in hassle until they break. She thought if she couldn't win the crowd, she could win through attrition. But the thing about attrition is, it only works on people who don't know how to endure. And I had weathered more storms than Karen could ever imagine. Still, even I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Her reach was spreading, pulling county officials, contractors, and neighbors into her private war. If I didn't push back hard, she'd make me a warning sign for the entire community. Defy the HOA, and this is what happens to you. So I fought fire with fire. I went to the county courthouse myself, pulled the survey records, tax documents, and the original plats dating back to the 1950s. I built a folder thicker than Karen's beloved clipboard, evidence layered with maps, signatures, and notarized stamps. My dock, my shoreline, my rights, in black and white, indisputable. Then I took it further. I started gathering statements from neighbors, the ones who had fished from my dock, tied up their kayaks, or borrowed tools from my shed. One by one, they signed affidavits backing my claim, and I added them to the growing arsenal. If Karen wanted a war of paper, I would bury her under the weight of truth. But I didn't stop there. I also filed complaints of my own. Harassment. Abuse of authority. Misuse of HOA funds. Because, as I discovered in the bylaws, that gavel she bought? It wasn't exactly approved. Every weapon she threw at me, I sharpened and hurled right back. But Karen escalated too. Her fury turned into obsession. She started patrolling the neighborhood like a hawk, SUV circling the lake road at all hours. Neighbors whispered about her knocking on doors, demanding they sign petitions against me. Some did, out of fear or exhaustion, but more turned her away. She responded with venom, threatening to fine them for weeds, for lawn ornaments, for anything she could dig up. The community that once tolerated her control began to fracture. Lines were drawn. Some sided with her, unwilling to risk her wrath. Others backed me, tired of being bullied. The lake, once peaceful, became a battleground of glances and whispers. Even the kids felt it, paddleboards giving wide berth to Karen's pontoon, bikes avoiding her driveway. It was no longer just a feud, it was a cold war on water. And then came the night of the floodlights. I was out on the dock, tightening lines before a storm rolled in, when suddenly the darkness exploded into white glare. 2 portable floodlights, powered by a generator, aimed directly at my cabin from across the cove. Karen stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses absurdly perched even in the dark, watching me like a warden watching a prisoner. The lights burned all night, searing through my curtains, robbing me of sleep. It was petty, vindictive, and deliberate, and it told me one thing: Karen wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. If this was a chessboard, she had just moved her queen into the open, daring me to counter. And as I stood there on my dock, rain beginning to fall, thunder rolling in the distance, I knew what had to come next. This wasn't about paper anymore. This was about breaking her grip once and for all. And the showdown, when it came, would either end her reign or cost me everything. The storm that had threatened the lake all week finally broke on the morning of the showdown. Dark clouds smothered the sun, and a restless wind churned the water into whitecaps that slapped against the shoreline. I stood on my dock, rain jacket zipped to my chin, tightening the lines that kept Karen's pontoon tethered firmly in place. Scout paced behind me, ears pinned flat, uneasy in the electric air. It wasn't just the weather that put him on edge. He could sense what I already knew. Today, Karen would make her final move. She had exhausted her arsenal of fines, complaints, and petty harassment. The floodlights, the mailbox dents, the endless certified letters, none of it had broken me. And for Karen, losing wasn't an option. The only path left was full confrontation, and she was about to walk it straight to my door. Sure enough, by mid-morning her silver SUV barreled down the gravel road like a charging bull. She parked at the edge of my driveway, so close her tires spat gravel into my lawn, and slammed the door with such force it echoed through the trees. She wasn't dressed in her usual pastel armor. Today she wore a black raincoat cinched tight, her hair plastered to her forehead by the mist, and her face twisted with a fury that had burned away all pretense of civility. In her hand was that same battered clipboard, now swollen with papers so wrinkled they looked like casualties of war. She marched down the path toward the dock, boots splashing in puddles, eyes locked on me like a predator. The storm wasn't just in the sky, it was in her stride, her voice, her very breath. "You think you've won," she shouted over the rising wind, waving the clipboard like a weapon. "You think you can humiliate me? Steal my boat? Turn this neighborhood against me?" Her voice cracked, half from rage, half from desperation. She stopped just short of the dock, water pooling around her ankles, and jabbed the clipboard at me. "This ends now. You untie my boat, you tear down this dock, and you apologize to the board, or I swear I will drag you through every court in this county until you're bankrupt." Her words came out like lightning strikes, sharp and blinding, but I didn't flinch. I let the storm whip around me, rain dripping off the brim of my hood, and answered in the calm, steady tone of a man who'd already made peace with his choice. "No, Karen," I said. Just 2 words, but they cut through the gale. She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of my defiance. I stepped forward, boots heavy on the planks. "This dock is mine. The land is mine. And your boat," I gestured behind me to where the pontoon rocked obediently against my dock, "is my proof that you can't control me. You've spent years bullying this neighborhood, hiding behind bylaws and clipboards, but your reign ends here. You can call every lawyer in the state, file every complaint you can dream up, it doesn't matter. You've already lost. Because everyone sees you for what you are now. The wind roared, carrying my words across the lake like a challenge carved into stone. Karen's face twisted, caught between fury and panic. She lunged forward, dropping her clipboard onto the wetboards, and grabbed at the ropes securing her pontoon. Her fingers fumbled at the knots, clawing desperately, but they wouldn't budge. I had tied them myself, clean, unbreakable, meant to hold fast against worse storms than this. "Let go of my boat!" she screamed, yanking at the lines until her palms turned red. I watched her struggle, her anger unraveling into something smaller, pettier, almost pathetic. "Karen," I said quietly, "you've built your whole life on control. But out here, on this dock, in this storm, you control nothing. Not the water. Not the wind. Not me." She froze, hands trembling on the rope, eyes wide with something that wasn't rage anymore, it was fear. Not of me, but of the truth. The truth that her empire of clipboards and bylaws had no power over the elements, or over a man who refused to kneel. The storm broke then in full, sheets of rain lashing down, thunder cracking so close it rattled the dock beneath our feet. Karen stumbled back, her soaked papers scattering across the planks, dissolving into pulp under the downpour. She tried to grab them, clutching at the ruined pages, but the wind tore them from her hands and sent them skittering into the water. One by one, her weapons sank beneath the waves, ink bleeding away, leaving nothing but soggy scraps floating on the surface. She let out a strangled cry, half scream, half sob, as if watching her very authority drown before her eyes. I didn't move to help. I just stood there, watching her empire collapse, until finally she turned and staggered back up the path, defeated. No gavel, no clipboard, no boat. Just Karen, small, broken, and stripped of the crown she had clung to for too long. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the lake washed clean under a pale golden sunrise. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, the kind of crisp freshness that only comes after thunder has wrung the world dry. I stepped onto my dock with a cup of coffee in hand, Scout trotting at my side, and looked out at the pontoon still tied firmly where Karen had tried and failed to reclaim it. The ropes were slick with dew, but they held fast, just as they had through the storm. For the first time in weeks, the water was calm, unbroken by floodlights, shouting, or the grinding presence of her SUV. All I heard was the call of a loon across the cove and the gentle lap of waves against the posts. Peace, the kind that only comes after a battle has been won. Word of what happened the night before spread quickly, faster than any official memo the HOA could send. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day, some with casseroles, some with handshakes, all with the same look in their eyes, relief. Relief that someone had finally stood up to Karen, relief that her reign of terror had cracked wide open in front of everyone. Mr. Hollis, who lived 2 houses down, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You did what we've all been too scared to do for years." Even the timid ones, the ones who used to cross the street when Karen patrolled with her clipboard, came by to thank me quietly, as if afraid she might still be lurking. But she wasn't. Her SUV sat abandoned at her driveway, tires sinking into mud, curtains drawn tight. It was as if the storm had carried her away, leaving only silence where her fury had once reigned. The HOA tried to salvage order in the days that followed, calling an emergency meeting in the community hall. But this time, Karen wasn't there to wield the gavel or browbeat the room into submission. Instead, the board members shuffled awkwardly, unable to fill the vacuum she left behind. When the floor opened for nominations, someone shouted my name. Then another. Then half the room echoed it until it became unanimous. I declined at first. Leadership wasn't what I wanted. I'd fought Karen for my peace, not her throne. But as I looked around at the faces, worn and weary from years under her thumb, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about making sure no one like her ever rose unchecked again. So I accepted, not as a ruler, but as a steward. A voice of reason where there had only been iron fists. In the weeks that followed, change swept the lake. The bylaws were revised, stripping away the absurd fines Karen had weaponized. Neighbors began to gather again, barbecues by the shore, kids playing without fear of reprimand, laughter where tension had once hung heavy. The dock became a symbol of resilience, not just mine, but the whole community's. People stopped by to fish, to sit, to share stories over mugs of coffee. Even the pontoon, once Karen's prized possession, found a new role. After the legal dust settled, ownership was transferred to cover her unpaid dues and fines. The board voted to make it a community boat, available to anyone on the lake. Every time I saw kids leap from its deck or families take it out for a spin, I couldn't help but smile. The very thing she tried to control became a gift she could never take back. As for Karen, she never fully returned. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister 2 towns over, too humiliated to show her face around the lake. Some said she was still fighting in court, filing endless appeals, but without allies or authority, her papers carried no weight. To me, she became just another story told around the fire, a warning of what happens when power is twisted into tyranny. And with each telling, her shadow shrank a little more, until she was no longer the monster at the lake, but just a woman who had lost her way. I didn't hate her, not anymore. If anything, I pitied her. Because in the end, all her rules and threats had left her with nothing, while the rest of us found freedom in her absence. So life returned to rhythm. Mornings on the dock, evenings by the fire, Scout at my feet. The lake was mine again, not just the shoreline or the marina, but the sense of belonging, the peace I had come here to find. And though the battle had been bitter, the outcome was worth every sleepless night. For in standing my ground, I hadn't just defended a dock. I defended the right to live free of fear, to refuse the chokehold of pettiness disguised as order. And as the sun set one quiet evening, painting the water gold and crimson, I finally allowed myself to lean back, breathe deep, and let the calm wash through me. The storm was over. Karen was gone. And the lake was alive again.